Hello, everyone. It's really a privilege to be with you today, the next generation of ministers and leaders for the church here in Nigeria. We're going to dive into a really powerful and, let's be honest, a really tough chapter from Miroslav Volf's Exclusion and Embrace. It's a work that makes us look square in the face at the complicated relationship between violence and peace in our faith.
So, Wolf kicks things off with something pretty unexpected. It's not a Bible verse, the raw, brutal command of political power from a novel. It's the voice of Pontius Pilate, a guy who sees violence as the ultimate solution, the final word on everything. And that voice, right from the start, sets the stage for the massive conflict we're about to unpack. And this leads us to the central clash that Wolf is getting at. On one side, you have Caesar's truth. It's a reality that's built on the sword and is maintained by the sword. But on the other side, you have the truth that Jesus talks about, a kingdom where, as he tells Pilate himself, that kind of power just isn't necessary. These are two totally different worlds, and they just can't be reconciled.
So that brings us to the big question, doesn't it? For us, and especially for you as you prepare for ministry, this isn't just some old story from history. It's a living, breathing question for today. How do we follow a nonviolent Lord in a world that, so much of the time, seems to only understand the language of violence? This puts us right in the middle of what Wolf calls the Christian's violent dilemma. It's this deep, internal struggle that, frankly, we often try to paper over or just ignore altogether. You know, we say we believe in the Jesus who told us to turn the other cheek. But are we really ready to do that when it comes down to it? Wolf suggests that maybe we're a lot like the first disciples. We're fascinated by Jesus' nonviolence, but we'd much rather follow him from a safe distance. We're terrified of actually sharing his fate. So how do we deal with that tension inside us? Well, Wolf points out a really common but pretty problematic strategy we use. We basically split Jesus into two different people. We create two different messiahs to operate in two different worlds. And this division of labor, as he calls it, is the key to understanding our confusion. We keep the crucified Messiah, the gentle, suffering servant, for our inner world, to take care of our personal build. But for the messy, public world of injustice and conflict, we call in the big guns, the rider on the white horse from the book of Revelation, a conquering king who's going to come and set things right with force. So you see the problem here, right? We want the comfort that comes from the cross for our own souls, but we want the power of the sword to solve the world's problems. Wolf is pushing us to ask a really hard question. Can these two images, the victim and the warrior, truly exist together in one coherent fate?
Now, just when you think he might be able to make that idea of a conquering Messiah work, Wolf throws a massive wrench in the works. He brings in a devastating critique from postmodern thinkers who are, let's just say, deeply suspicious of any claims to absolute power. This quote from Gilles Deleuze is, well, it's a shocker. What he's arguing is that the Christian vision of God's final judgment isn't the solution to violence. No, he says it's the ultimate form of violence. The New Jerusalem, in his view, isn't a picture of freedom. It's a cosmic, totalitarian police state.
I mean, wow. Deleuze's challenge really gets under your skin. He's asking, is our hope for heaven just a holy-sounding dream of getting revenge? Is the final judgment just the ultimate act of violence, born out of the resentment of the weak, who are just fantasizing about one day becoming the powerful? It's a deeply uncomfortable question, but one we have to face.
But right at this point, when the tension is at its absolute peak, Wolf does something amazing. He offers a completely counterintuitive solution. He says we've been looking at the whole problem the wrong way. Okay, this right here, this is the absolute heart of Wolf's argument. He says that the crucified Messiah and the rider on the white horse are not enemies. They're not a before and after picture of Jesus. They are partners, working together for the exact same goal, non-violence. Now, how on earth is that possible? Well, first, let's look at the cross. It actively fights against violence in 4 ways. 1, it absorbs violence and breaks the endless cycle of retaliation. 2, it exposes the lie of scapegoating by showing that the victim was innocent. 3, it shows that nonviolence isn't passive. It's part of an active struggle for justice. And 4, it's the way God embraces even his enemies, the unjust.
Okay, so what about the rider? This is the brilliant part. The rider's action is not a model for us to copy. The rider represents God's final, perfect, just judgment. And it's because we can trust that God will judge rightly that we are set free from the crushing need to seek our own revenge. You see, The writer's judgment actually makes our nonviolence possible.
So, this isn't just a clever theological argument. It has huge practical implications for how we live our lives and how we approach ministry. It makes our own calling in this violent world incredibly clear.
Wolf uses this key phrase, theologization of violence. What does that even mean? Well, simply put, it means that the Bible takes that deeply human, deeply destructive desire for revenge, and it takes it out of our hands and places it in God's hands, and God's hands alone. God basically claims a monopoly on final judgment.
So let's be crystal clear about this. There is a division of labor, but it's not between two different versions of Jesus. It's between God and us. Our job is not to play God. We're not called to pick up the writer's sword of judgment. We're called to carry the Messiah's cross of suffering love and to trust that the final score will be settled by the only one who can judge justly. And this is where Wolf makes it so real. He says, look, it's one thing to sit in a quiet, safe home and talk about a God who refuses to judge. It's quite another to preach that message in a war zone to people whose families have been brutalized and killed. And for all of you, right here, preparing for ministry in a nation that has known deep and painful conflict, this is not some abstract theory from a Western academic. The belief in a God who will judge, who will make things right in the end, is the very thing that makes the difficult, costly call to nonviolence and forgiveness possible to live out. It's a theology for survival. It's a theology for faithful witness. And so we end right back where we started, with a question for you to take with you into your ministries. In a world that is constantly screaming at you to pick up the sword, to defend yourself, your truth, your people, how will you find the strength, the faith, and the sheer courage to carry the cross instead?